Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I'm going to continue to talk about credible threats. I've had so many people now email me and comment saying, dude, you absolutely nailed the credible threat theory. You could not have described it any more accurately than what has actually taken place. Now, I'm not going to say that, but this is some of the comments that I am getting. And it's not really like my theory. This is the theory. This is the strategy coming from the Federal Reserve. Like, once you understand the strategy, then it's not necessarily like a theory. It's like their playbook that is coming, right? I mean, they are describing it quite accurately. And if you can kind of look at it from their perspective, then, well, you can see it as easily as I did, right? But it's not me who is predicting this stuff. It's really the Federal Reserve who's just straight up saying it, right? Now, the credible threat theory, if you're new to my channel, like if this is the first time you have ever seen one of my videos, I'm going to let you know now that I am not like some kind of economic major. I'm not a financial guy. I'm not an investor. I don't own businesses. I don't even come from a family of wealth or anything like that, right? I am literally a hobbyist in this thing. But I was able to call out the lumber market more accurately than just about anybody out there. And in fact, it was so accurate that I had George Gammon invite me down to the Rebel Capitalist so that I could talk about the lumber industry and explain what it is that was happening. Okay? Now, when I see the credible threat theory and I explain it out there, once people understand it and they see it, they're like, man, this is what's happening. This is the obvious thing, right? All the other economists out there who talked about how the Fed failed and they don't know what they're doing and inflation was out of control and, all this other stuff, they missed it. They don't understand what it is that the Federal Reserve was trying to do. They don't understand the credible threat theory, right? So now I'm going to explain the credible threat theory and explain why it is so prevalent today in the market and how it is that people are falling for it. They are like literally falling straight up for this like tactic, right? I mean, really, that's what it is. It's a tactic, right? Because it's not reality. Reality is when things actually take place. But when you have a belief that something is going to take place, or you believe that a certain situation is happening, or you believe that people are conducting themselves in a certain way, or they lead you to believe that, it's gaslighting. And that's what's really happening here. The credible threat theory is the same as gaslighting. Now, you look at the markets right now. The Federal Reserve has made this promise, right? I don't even know where the hell this promise came from, right? But a lot of people who, especially when you look at the mainstream media, is under this belief that the Federal Reserve is going to be dropping interest rates at the end of the year, the end of next year, 2024, right? And it's not a matter of if, but when, right? Like, there is no if they drop interest rates at the end of the year. Now they conduct themselves in a way that is going to now have the markets looking and behaving as if it already happened, right? Even though nothing has taken place. The Fed hasn't adjusted anything. They haven't changed anything from what they had done last week to this week. No difference. But the market's perception and the people's perception has completely changed. Everything about it. The mainstream media has pushed out the narrative so prominently into the people's heads that there is no other possibility now exists. Right? It's a matter of when the interest rates fall. This now has them making decisions like buying houses or maybe starting businesses or doing investments or doing all kinds of stuff with this idea of this dropping of interest rates going into the future. That is the credible threat right there. Nothing has taken place, but the promise has. Right? Now, where did this credible threat come from? The Fed knew that they were going to have to use this for their monetary policy, these credible threats. See, monetary policy typically came from the Federal Reserve with the lowering of interest rates. Like, if they wanted to stimulate the economy, they could take their Fed funds rate, drop it around 5%, and that dropping of interest rates would then spark people out there to go buy houses and cars and go on vacation and spend this money into the economy. Right? The lowering of interest rates was a stimulating effect. But when the Federal Reserve hit the lower bound of zero, monetary policy disappeared. They no longer had an effective tool for stimulating the economy. But that's okay, because they got the credible threats, and we're seeing it play out today. Right? Ben Bernanke talked about the credible threats from a speech that he had given back in early 2000, saying, talking about deflation and how to prevent it from ever taking place here in the United States. And part of that was running into the lower bound, being the issue with deflation and how to stimulate the economy. Like if you're at the lower bound of zero, how do you drop interest rates to get people to go borrow money? You can't, right? But you can if you have a credible threat. So let's think about this credible threat. The way Ben Bernanke talked about it working, if you had and he talked about it inside of a story of a guy who invents a gold machine. Now, if you have a gold machine that can produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy to it, the moment that the information gets out that you have this machine, the price of gold would plummet. Even before you produce a single ounce of gold, even before you even have the machine to do it. Just the credible threat alone that it is possible would cause the price of gold on the market to plummet. That's the credible threat. Nothing has changed. Nothing from last week to this week has changed, but the perception has. Now we have stimulation happening to the economy. We have markets moving up. We got people anticipating buying houses that they could refinance it into the future when they got lower interest rates. We got people who are now, buying into the bond market thinking that, yields are going to be dropping and the prices are going to be moving up. All this stimulus starts going into the economy. They didn't have to do nothing. They're sitting on their hands. Everybody's doing all the work for them. But they did have to put out the credible threat. I mean, they do have to be convincing, right? Got to be convincing. See, people didn't believe the Fed. That's another thing. Nobody wants to believe the Fed when they say that inflation was going to be transitory, but now they want to believe the Fed when they say that they're going to be dropping interest rates in a year. Yeah. Why didn't you want to believe them then, but now you want to believe them? Right? I mean, do you pick and choose when you want to believe them? See, I don't think necessarily that the Fed is going to be dropping interest rates at the end of the year. I mean, they might, but it's the credible threat. This is what they're doing with it. Like, they don't, whether or not they drop interest rates doesn't really mean anything until you get there. Do they need to continue to establish the credible threat? Are they in a position in which they should be dropping rates? That whole environment could be very different by the time they get there. You got to think, this is a year from now that they're planning on doing it. And then even on that, the dropping of interest rates, the Fed funds rate, that has a lag to it. Now, even if you do put out the forward guidance, the signaling, the job owning, this credible threat, even if you put that out there, there's still a lag that takes place from the time that you actually adjust interest rates to the time that impacts the economy. And if you put out the forward guidance, you can narrow that up some, but there is a time to it from the time you raise it to the time it impacts. So even if the Federal Reserve was to adjust interest rates in 2024, the actual impact to the economy doesn't happen until 2025. That's another thing to think about, right? More than a year from now. So these are some of the things that we have to really understand about the economy and what's being put out there in the news, because what's being said in the news is not seeming to be what's coming from the Federal Reserve and their monetary strategy. Not from the things that I've learned, right? And I don't want to be in support of the Federal Reserve. I'm not a shill for the Fed. I can care less. Right? It's not up to me to judge whether or not the Fed is a good or bad thing. It's up to me to make the most appropriate decisions for myself. Right? So if I can understand the Fed's strategy in a way that is much different from everybody else's, then I know that I'm going to conduct myself in a way that is most appropriate. Everybody else thinks the Federal Reserve is going to be adjusting interest rates and they are now conducting themselves appropriately for that decision. I think that's a credible threat. Personally. I think we're going to have liquidity issues and we are going to have a lot of stuff that is going to start occurring within the banking system that nobody's really talking about today. Right? I think the Federal Reserve will deploy tools like the Bank Term Funding Program that is unknown to anybody out here in order to deal with the liquidity crisis that is going to be coming in 2024. I think the bond market, as far as the Treasury and the U.S. Treasury bond market, I think they're prepared for it or getting prepared for it. You can see this with the Treasury General account. If you look at this account, typically it would have half the amount or even a third of the amount of money that is in it right now. It's because I feel the Treasury is getting ready to deploy a lot of that money back into the bond market with the purchasing of their own bonds, which is something that I don't think a lot of people are considering. But if you just Google that, Treasury buys back their own bonds, you're going to find that there is articles out there from the mainstream media, from Bloomberg, Reuters, Wall Street Journal, what would typically be considered, a reliable source. I mean, whether or not you consider it that is up to you. But I mean, still, this is the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, and Reuters who are talking about it. and they only bring it up in one article and they never talk about it again? Why are they keeping it so secret? Right? It's because if everybody knew about it, it wouldn't work. But they do have to put it out there for some people to understand and know that it's happening, because it's a message out there to the elitist. Right? I'm not trying to say that that's what it directly is, but if you don't remember that and you don't hear it, then you don't know, and they aren't telling you, right? And it ends up occurring, then who really got the message, right? That's all I guess I'm saying. This is like, anyhow, I'm kind of rambling on here, but I just wanted to clarify it again. We need to talk about the credible threat theory, because this is the main policy coming from the Federal Reserve. It's not about a matter of adjusting interest rates or, bank levels or anything like that. That has a lot to do with the financial system and making sure that that stays, in operation and stuff. But the major monetary policy, how it is that the Federal Reserve plans on stimulating the economy, is with credible threats, and we are experiencing it right now. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.